Humanity was never supposed to matter in the grand theater of the stars, at least not according to the Galactic Council, whose members measured every species by the weight of their fleets, the size of their guns, and the efficiency of their logic. To them, power was arithmetic, simple and unyielding. The one with the most ships, the most resources, and the largest empire would rule. That was the law of the cosmos, an axiom accepted as eternal as gravity itself. So when Earth first entered the galactic stage, the other civilizations did not flinch, did not even bother to shift in their thrones of crystal and light. What was humanity but a fragile bipedal species crawling from a single world, barely a few centuries removed from burning wood to cook food, barely capable of piercing its own atmosphere? The archives noted them as curious, noisy, emotional, but strategically irrelevant. They were not considered warriors, nor philosophers, nor builders of empires. They were a footnote. And yet, history has always loved to use footnotes as knives. The first whispers came from the outer sectors, where long-range observation posts caught anomalies around Sol. At first it looked like resource movement, maybe the construction of orbital stations or asteroid mining platforms. Harmless. Expected. But then the reports piled higher, and the anomalies grew stranger. Massive structures eclipsing moons, shadows against starlight that hinted at scales no fledgling race should possess. By the time the Council dispatched reconnaissance fleets to confirm, the rumors had already poisoned the air of every chamber in the galaxy. Humans, it seemed, were building something vast, something concealed under veils of deception and electromagnetic trickery. But deception was not supposed to be part of humanity's story. By alien logic, a young race cannot leapfrog the equations of progress. You cannot skip the centuries of staged expansion, the resource bottlenecks, the limitations of industrial scale. There are steps carved into the very fabric of civilization. First you colonize, then you exploit, then you militarize, then you empire build. No one had ever broken that chain. And yet the chain rattled when the first probe revealed the silhouette of a world that was not a world. It was artificial. It was colossal. It was a warship the size of a planet, and it bore the signature of Earth. The Council laughed at first, because laughter is the weapon of the arrogant. They said it must be a shell, a bluff, some overinflated mining project mistaken for a ship. They argued in long debates that humans did not possess the energy grids, nor the stellar forges, nor the centuries of unified will it would take to build even a fraction of such a monstrosity. But the laughter thinned when the second, third, and fourth planet ships emerged from the dark. Each was different, one bristling with weapons arrays that looked like mountains forged into spines, another appearing almost like an artist's sculpture, curves of mirrored alloy designed not just for war but for beauty, the third simply an abyssal giant, armored so thickly that stars reflected off its hull like fireflies on obsidian. In less than a decade of galactic time, humanity had unveiled not one, but a fleet of worlds that could crush empires simply by existing. Fear spread faster than light across the Council's chambers, because the axiom of the universe had just been broken. If strength is measured by the largest, then humanity had leapt from irrelevance to the apex predator of existence without warning, without precedent, and without permission. But it was not just the scale that terrified them, it was the question that followed. Why? Why would a species so small, so young, pour its every resource into creating monstrosities of steel and thought the size of continents? What philosophy drove such madness? Most empires built fleets to conquer neighbors, to enforce dominion, to extract obedience. Yet humanity's armada did not move to conquer. It did not spread invasions across the stars. It waited, silent, colossal, orbiting Earth like sentinels. Watching. Waiting. That silence screamed louder than war. The alien philosophers who tried to decode this new threat went mad with contradictions. By every logic known to galactic history, no species builds such weapons and then refuses to use them. The Council's intelligence services whispered of a deeper plan, something invisible beneath the obvious. That was the first hint that humanity's warships were not weapons at all, at least not in the way aliens understood weapons. Because to humans, war had always been more than firepower. For humans, war was philosophy given form. Every age of Earth had proven it. Wars fought not just for land, but for ideals, for freedom, for identity, for dreams. Humanity's bloodlines were soaked in paradox. They fought and destroyed, yet also wrote poetry about peace, built art in the ruins of battle, found meaning in suffering that no algorithm could parse. To aliens, logic was simple: eliminate threat, secure dominance, maintain order. To humans, logic was flawed if it did not account for the irrational flame of meaning. That was their secret. The planet ships were symbols as much as they were machines, weapons sculpted into questions. Each one asked the galaxy, what is power, truly? Is it the ability to kill, or the ability to choose not to? Is it dominance over others, or mastery over oneself? Is it empire, or endurance? No alien empire had ever asked those questions, because to ask them was to risk weakness. But to humanity, to embrace those questions was strength itself. And so the galaxy stared into the black mirrors of Earth's creations, and for the first time in eons, they doubted their own truths. The council called emergency sessions, shouting over one another in fear and arrogance. Some demanded preemptive war against humanity, to strike before those colossi moved. Others urged caution, whispering that perhaps the humans had already mastered philosophies of war no one else could grasp. And in every chamber, the same question haunted them: what if the planet ships were not humanity's real weapon? What if they were merely the surface, the distraction, the mask over something far greater, the weapon of thought? Because hidden inside those worlds of steel were not just cannons and reactors, but libraries, theaters, gardens, and observatories. Humanity had built planet ships not just as tools of destruction, but as living worlds of philosophy. Each warship was also a university. Each gun battery overlooked amphitheaters where poets recited verse. Each armored deck concealed laboratories probing the mysteries of consciousness. Humanity had not built machines of war. Humanity had built civilizations within shells of iron, carrying their culture, their contradictions, their infinite hunger to question everything. The aliens could not compute it. How do you fight a species whose weapons are questions sharper than blades? How do you defeat a people whose strategy is to make you doubt the very foundation of your existence? That was the genius of humanity's hidden power. They knew the galaxy was enslaved not by weapons, but by logic itself. And so they broke it. And in breaking it, they reshaped destiny. The galaxy thought it feared planet-sized warships. What it truly feared was the philosophy hiding inside them. And this was only the beginning. The council did not sleep after the revelation, for the galaxy had never seen such heresy against the natural order, and to them humanity's very existence had become a paradox that demanded resolution. The universal axiom was simple: power exists to be used, and any civilization that holds it will wield it. History was littered with empires who had amassed fleets only to hurl them into conquest. None had ever resisted the temptation. Yet here humanity stood, guardians of planet-sized warships that could gut entire sectors, and they remained silent, unmoving, almost patient. It was as if they had built thunder and then chosen not to strike. To the alien mind, this was not restraint but madness. And madness was dangerous, for logic cannot predict it. The first responses were predictable. Several empires called for preemptive annihilation. They reasoned that if humanity were erased before it moved, the threat would vanish. Fleets were drafted, strategies calculated, and weapons primed. But even as those plans whispered through the chambers, fear restrained their hands. How could anyone be certain the humans had built only 4 planet ships? The galaxy had seen 4 revealed, but what if dozens more slumbered unseen in the shadows of gas giants and asteroid belts? What if Earth itself was shielded by an unseen fleet, larger than anything the galaxy had ever known? The cost of war suddenly outweighed its benefits, and so hesitation became paralysis. Meanwhile, the philosophers and logic masters of the council convened to dissect the riddle. They asked, why does a species pour its lifeblood into constructing such monstrosities, yet not seek to conquer? The answer eluded them, for they saw only through the lens of domination. To dominate is to exist, to refrain is to weaken. But the humans, strange, fragile, contradictory humans, had always inverted logic. They fought wars for freedom instead of empire, destroyed tyrants only to rebuild peace, and even in the bloodiest battles of their history, they wrote poems about love and sang songs about hope. Such contradictions did not fit into galactic philosophy, which thrived on clean equations. Thus the Council's debates spiraled into chaos. Some argued that the humans were planning a war so devastating, so complete, that patience was part of the strategy. Others believed the warships themselves were not weapons but symbols, designed to intimidate. But the most radical whisper, the one that frightened even the proudest empires, was that the ships were never about war at all. Evidence mounted. Surveillance drones captured faint transmissions from the interiors of those colossal hulls, and what they revealed chilled the interpreters, not military drills, but lectures. Not soldiers in formation, but crowds listening to philosophers and scientists. Not engineers arming cannons, but children gazing at stars from within domes of glass. The warships were alive, not in the biological sense, but alive with culture, with thought, with questioning. They were moving worlds of philosophy disguised as engines of war. Humanity had not built weapons, they had built mirrors to force the galaxy to see itself. Imagine the horror this caused. For countless ages, the Council had enforced stability through fear, through logic that reduced every choice to survival or conquest. But if another species rejected that logic, if it built power not to wield but to question, then the very foundation of galactic order was at risk. For power unused becomes philosophy, and philosophy spreads faster than fleets. Already, alien youth across the stars began to whisper about humanity's choice. On backwater worlds and crowded city planets, people asked, why do we fight endless wars if humans with godlike weapons choose peace? Why do we enslave when humans with chains of steel around stars do not? The questions spread like infection, unstoppable, and with every question the Council's grip weakened. Humanity had weaponized doubt, and doubt was something no armada could kill. The Council tried to suppress it, branding humanity as deceivers, painting the warships as doomsday threats waiting to consume worlds. But the propaganda rang hollow, for the images told another story: planet ships orbiting Earth, silent, unmoving, never invading, never demanding tribute. To the ordinary citizen of the galaxy, the contradiction was undeniable. The humans had built the greatest arsenal in history, and yet their silence was louder than any conquest. Fear and awe merged into reverence. Among some species, cults even formed, declaring humanity as prophets of a new cosmic age, the first to challenge the tyranny of logic. Others rebelled quietly against their rulers, citing Earth as proof that another path was possible. All this time, humanity remained quiet, offering no proclamations, no manifestos. Their silence was deliberate, a silence carved into steel. But silence cannot last forever. The moment came when a delegation of alien diplomats dared to approach one of the planet ships, trembling as they crossed its shadow. They expected to see rows of guns, command centers bristling with admirals, but instead they found theaters of debate, gardens of philosophy, and in the heart of the giant, a hall where a single human scholar waited. Not a soldier, not a general, but a thinker. And it was this thinker who finally revealed what the galaxy could not grasp: the ships were never about destruction, but about choice. Humanity had studied galactic history, had seen how every empire fell into the same trap of power, how every civilization chained itself to the axiom of dominance. And so they built a weapon not to break worlds but to break the axiom itself. The planet ships were paradoxes made real. They existed so that the galaxy could see power contained, see strength mastered by restraint, see that the true weapon of humanity was not their steel but their philosophy. Power unused was not weakness, it was proof of will, proof of freedom. The alien diplomats did not know how to respond, for their entire lives had been built on the certainty that logic was eternal. And now, before them, stood the embodiment of a logic that was stronger than logic itself. For what is scarier, an empire that attacks, or an empire that does not need to. Word of the encounter spread, and with it came both hope and terror. Some empires began to fracture under the weight of new ideas, as citizens demanded philosophy over conquest. Others doubled down on tyranny, desperate to cling to the old truth before the new one consumed them. War loomed not because of humanity's weapons, but because of their ideas. And the greatest irony was this: humanity did not even need to fire a single shot. Their warships had already fired, in silence, with the philosophy they carried. In the Council's final secret session of that age, one alien elder whispered words that chilled even his own kind: perhaps the humans have not built warships at all. Perhaps they have built mirrors so vast that every empire is forced to see its own reflection. And in that reflection, we see that we are already dead. Humanity's secret weapon was working, and the galaxy had only begun to feel the tremors. The galaxy had always believed that history was a straight line, drawn by the hands of the most powerful, each empire carving its mark upon the stars with fleets and fire, each civilization rising and falling by the same merciless arithmetic of dominance. But the arrival of humanity's planet-sized warships had shattered that line, splitting it into questions that no logic could erase, and as the weeks became years the Council discovered that the most dangerous enemy is not the fleet you can see but the idea you cannot kill. Civilizations that had once sworn blind allegiance to the axiom of conquest began to fracture under the weight of questions seeded by humanity's silent colossi. Why do we fight when another path is possible? Why do we conquer when restraint is stronger? Why do we measure greatness in war when perhaps true greatness is refusing to become war itself? These questions were poison to the logic of the Council, because logic can predict action but never meaning, and it was meaning that humanity had weaponized. The planet ships became pilgrimage sites, with delegations from dozens of species arriving not to negotiate treaties or surrender, but to listen. Inside the armored walls of those giants, philosophers spoke of freedom, scientists lectured about curiosity as power, and artists showed that the strength of a species could be measured in its ability to imagine something beyond domination. To aliens raised on equations of conquest, it was like glimpsing a new dimension of existence, a realm where weakness and strength intertwined, where vulnerability itself became a weapon because it birthed empathy, cooperation, and the terrifying possibility of unity. The Council panicked, for their hold on the galaxy was unraveling faster than any war had undone it, and yet every attempt to strike humanity down with fleets collapsed under the weight of fear. They did not know how many planet ships truly existed. They did not know what weapons might sleep inside them. And above all, they did not know whether destroying them would martyr humanity's philosophy and spread it even faster. In desperation, the Council tried to confront humanity directly, sending envoys demanding explanations. But explanations are dangerous, because they become revelations, and the human envoy they met was not a general or an emperor but a simple teacher, a woman whose calm eyes carried the weight of a species that had survived its own endless contradictions. She told them that the warships were not a threat but a question: what if power was not destiny but choice? She explained that humans had studied galactic history, seen the inevitability of cycles of conquest and collapse, and had chosen to break the cycle not with force but with philosophy embodied in steel. We built these ships, she said, so that we could never forget the paradox. That we are capable of absolute destruction, and therefore must choose creation. That we are capable of tyranny, and therefore must choose freedom. We built them so the galaxy could see that strength is not the ability to kill, but the ability not to. The Council's envoys dismissed her as mad, yet her words rippled like thunder through their cultures, carried by whispers and recordings, spreading faster than censorship could stop. The idea was viral, because it did not require belief in humanity, it required only doubt in the old axiom, and doubt was already growing like cracks in glass. One by one, younger civilizations began to question the Council's authority, rebellion sparked not by guns but by words, by the image of humans sitting beneath the shadows of world-sized weapons and refusing to fire them. The galaxy discovered that the true war was not for territory but for meaning, and in that war humanity had already struck a mortal blow. Yet even as revolutions brewed, humanity did not celebrate, for they knew the danger of their own creation. A paradox can liberate, but it can also consume. If restraint is power, then what happens when restraint falters? If peace is weaponized, what happens when peace is broken? And so the planet ships remained in orbit, guardians not only against invasion but against humanity's own temptation. For the humans understood a truth deeper than any alien had dared to contemplate, that the greatest enemy is not others but themselves, and that their philosophy was only as strong as their will to uphold it. This was the bittersweet edge of their revelation. Humanity had freed the galaxy from the tyranny of logic, but in doing so had bound itself to an even harsher destiny, to forever stand as the example, to never yield to the very power they wielded. The Council saw this and understood that they had lost, for how can you fight a species that has turned restraint into immortality? Empires can be broken, fleets can be burned, but ideas that live in the mind of every being cannot be destroyed. And so a new cosmic order emerged, not through conquest but through philosophy, not through blood but through doubt. The galaxy was no longer governed by the axiom of might, but by the terrifying possibility of choice, and humanity's warships hung in the void as eternal reminders that the universe itself could be rewritten. For the first time in countless millennia, the Council knew fear not of weapons, but of meaning. And for the first time, the galaxy knew hope not of conquest, but of freedom. Humanity had changed the order of existence forever, and in that change lay both salvation and doom, for the weapon they had unleashed could not be recalled, and its consequences would echo until the stars themselves went dark. The galaxy unraveled in silence before it screamed, for revolutions never begin with explosions but with whispers, and humanity's philosophy had spread like wildfire disguised as doubt, a force more corrosive than any weapon forged in the furnaces of stars. Entire species who had lived under the shadow of the Council for millennia now found themselves asking questions they had been forbidden even to think. Why must we obey? Why must conquest define us? Why must logic alone bind us when humanity has shown that even paradox can be stronger? The first cracks appeared in the lesser empires, those whose fleets had long been chained to serve greater powers. Soldiers began refusing orders to strike, governors questioned decrees, and entire sectors seethed with unrest. The Council tried to smother these fires with propaganda, painting humanity as deceivers who cloaked conquest in philosophy, insisting that their planet ships were doomsday machines waiting for the perfect moment to enslave all. But propaganda is powerless when truth sits visible in the sky. Alien citizens could tune their telescopes to Earth and see the silent giants orbiting its sun, motionless, unmoving, never once invading a neighbor, never once striking preemptively. That silence was louder than any broadcast, and it drowned the Council's lies. Soon uprisings erupted, not with weapons but with refusals, with civil disobedience, with the terrifying power of choice. Armies dissolved because their soldiers no longer believed in the wars they were asked to fight. Whole colonies declared neutrality, citing Earth as proof that peace was possible. And the Council, mighty though it had been for eons, discovered that the true foundation of power is not steel or fleets but belief, and belief had shifted. The elders of the Council raged, calling humanity a disease, a contagion of the mind, and in a sense they were correct. Humanity's philosophy spread not through conquest but through infection, each question a spore drifting into alien consciousness, blooming into rebellion. Yet humanity did not command these uprisings, nor did they seek to profit from them. They watched with the same silence they had carried since the beginning, for they understood the paradox of their creation. To lead was to dominate, and to dominate was to betray the very philosophy they had unleashed. The burden weighed heavily on them. Every human knew that their restraint was now the cornerstone of a new galactic order, and that if they faltered even once, if they wielded their warships in anger or desperation, the entire philosophy would collapse and prove the Council right. Humanity had forged a prison of ideals for itself, more binding than any chains, and they bore it because they knew the alternative was worse. The Council, in its desperation, launched secret campaigns to shatter the illusion. Covert fleets tried to provoke humanity, striking near the Sol system, hoping to trigger retaliation. But each time, humanity responded with precision and restraint, intercepting attacks without destroying fleets, disabling weapons without killing crews, returning captured enemies alive and unharmed. These acts were not weakness, they were deliberate demonstrations of mastery. For nothing unnerves an enemy more than facing a foe who can kill but refuses to. To the galaxy, this restraint was godlike. To the council, it was terror, because no strategy could defeat it. And so, one by one, the empires fractured. Some joined humanity in quiet alliance, not bound by treaties but by philosophy, by the shared recognition that meaning was greater than domination. Others clung desperately to the old ways, carving empires from the ruins, but even they found themselves haunted by doubt. Every battle they fought, every conquest they launched, was questioned by their own citizens. Why do we kill when humans with power beyond imagining do not? In this way, humanity had achieved the impossible. They had rewritten the operating system of civilization itself, turning philosophy into a weapon that reshaped the galaxy without firing a shot. But even as the galaxy shifted, humanity remained uneasy, for they understood that their victory was bittersweet. To embody restraint was to bear eternal vigilance, to never allow anger or fear to dictate their hand. They knew that someday, perhaps centuries from now, a human might fail, might order the guns of a planet ship to fire in rage, and in that single moment the entire edifice would collapse. For now, though, they stood as examples, their colossi orbiting Earth like monuments to a paradox, guardians not of territory but of meaning. Across the galaxy, poets wrote verses about the ships, artists painted them as symbols of choice, philosophers debated whether restraint itself could be sustainable. Children of alien worlds grew up idolizing humanity not for conquest but for patience, and in their innocence lay both hope and danger. For philosophy, once born, cannot be contained, and already interpretations splintered. Some species worshipped humanity as saviors, creating cults that distorted their message into dogma. Others twisted restraint into justification for stagnation, refusing to advance at all. Humanity had unleashed freedom, but freedom is chaotic, and its consequences cannot be predicted. That was the cosmic cost of their victory. They had broken the Council's tyranny of logic, but they had not replaced it with order, only with possibility. And possibility is both beautiful and terrifying. In secret, some human philosophers warned their leaders that the galaxy might eventually turn on them not because of what they had done, but because of what they represented. To the fearful, restraint could look like manipulation. To the desperate, silence could look like superiority. Already whispers began. What if the humans waited not to conquer but to let the galaxy collapse on itself, so they could inherit the ashes? What if their restraint was only camouflage for a slower, more insidious conquest of the mind? Humanity knew they could not control these narratives, and perhaps they should not, for control itself was a form of domination. Instead, they continued their vigil, knowing that their only defense was to live their philosophy, to embody it so fully that even lies could not stand against it. The galaxy had been changed forever, but the change was unstable, volatile, unpredictable. Humanity had opened a door that could never be closed, and now every civilization had to walk through it or be broken by it. The Council, once eternal, dwindled into irrelevance, its members scattered, its authority reduced to empty rituals. And yet, even in its fall, it whispered curses against humanity, predicting that one day the paradox would fail, that one day the humans would fire their weapons and prove themselves no different. Perhaps the Council was right. Perhaps restraint cannot last forever. Perhaps humanity's greatest triumph was also the seed of its downfall. But for now, the galaxy looked upon the silent warships and trembled, not with fear of death, but with awe at the possibility of freedom. The galaxy had been rewritten, not by fire but by silence, not by conquest but by philosophy, and in that paradox lay both its salvation and its doom, for no civilization could return to the old axiom once it had glimpsed another path, and yet the new path was one no map could chart, a road into uncertainty where the greatest weapon was choice itself. Humanity's planet ships remained in orbit like gods that refused to speak, colossal monuments that forced every empire to remember what had been broken, and across 1,000 worlds voices rose in awe and in anger. Some called the human saints, prophets of a new age who had shown that freedom was greater than dominance. Others cursed them as liars, manipulators who had shackled the galaxy not with chains but with ideals more binding than any empire's decree. Yet no one could deny that everything had changed. and in that change humanity bore the heaviest burden of all. For in freeing the galaxy from logic's tyranny, they had condemned themselves to eternal restraint. They could not falter, could not lash out, could not allow their warships to become what the Council had feared. For if even once a planet ship fired in anger, the paradox would collapse, and the galaxy would laugh bitterly that humans had been no different, that all their philosophy was only camouflage for the same old hunger. Thus humanity became not conquerors but custodians, guardians not of territory but of meaning, chained to the very freedom they had unleashed. And they knew the truth with a clarity that chilled them: no chain is heavier than the one you forge for yourself. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy drifted into an age of questioning. Old empires collapsed, new movements rose, and the Council faded into legend, remembered only as the guardians of a flawed axiom that had been broken by Earth. Worlds once enslaved by logic found themselves free to imagine new futures, but freedom is not order, and soon the stars burned with chaos as much as hope. Some civilizations embraced the human paradox and flourished, building cultures of philosophy, art, and restraint. Others twisted the paradox into fanaticism, worshipping humanity as divine and demanding obedience in the name of their silence. Wars erupted not for territory but for meaning, as species clashed over interpretations of humanity's message, each claiming to understand the paradox better than the others. And through it all, the humans endured, silent, patient, burdened by the knowledge that they had set this chaos in motion and could not control it. Their scholars debated endlessly: had they freed the galaxy, or had they doomed it to eternal uncertainty? Was restraint a gift, or was it a curse? Some argued that humanity's true weapon was not philosophy but chaos itself, that by breaking the axiom they had unleashed entropy upon the order of civilizations. Others claimed that chaos was life, that only in uncertainty could true freedom exist. Humanity themselves could not agree, and perhaps that was the truest reflection of their nature: contradiction given form, paradox embodied. The galaxy watched them with suspicion and reverence, unable to decide whether they were saviors or executioners. And in the deepest halls of thought, philosophers whispered the most terrifying question of all: what if the paradox was unsustainable? What if one day humanity broke? What if, in anger or fear, a single planet ship unleashed its guns and shattered the illusion? Would the galaxy collapse back into tyranny, or would it simply spiral into endless war without anchor or truth? That fear hung heavier than any fleet, for it meant the destiny of billions rested not on logic but on the fragile will of one contradictory species. Yet humanity did not retreat from the burden. They bore it, as they had borne every contradiction of their history. They remembered the genocides they had committed and the art they had created in the same breath. They remembered the wars they had fought and the peace they had dreamed. They remembered that they had always been capable of both horror and beauty, and that their true power was not in denying one or the other but in carrying both and choosing, again and again, to reach for meaning. That was the weapon no alien could understand, not fleets, not ships, not even philosophy itself, but choice repeated endlessly against the abyss. And so the planet ships orbited like eternal questions, and every being who gazed upon them was forced to face themselves. What is power? What is freedom? What is meaning? In the silence of those giants, answers were born, and those answers reshaped civilizations. Some worlds abandoned conquest forever, dedicating themselves to philosophy and art. Others dissolved into nihilism, unable to bear the weight of doubt. But no one remained untouched, and that was humanity's victory and their curse. They had ensured they would never again be irrelevant, but they had also ensured they could never escape responsibility. For as long as their ships hung in the void, the galaxy would look to them as examples, waiting to see if they lived their philosophy or betrayed it. And humanity knew they could never rest, for the burden of example is endless. In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, among the youngest civilizations just beginning to crawl from their homeworlds, the legends of Earth spread like myths. Children grew up hearing of the people who had built planet-sized warships and refused to use them, who had rewritten destiny not with guns but with restraint. To them, humanity was not just a species but a symbol, proof that another way was possible. Some vowed to follow in their footsteps. Others vowed to surpass them, to build even greater paradoxes, to carry philosophy further than humans had dared. And so the seed humanity had planted grew beyond them, into futures they could not control, into possibilities both glorious and terrifying. For that is the nature of philosophy: once spoken, it cannot be contained, and once lived, it cannot be erased. Humanity had changed the galaxy forever, but they had also lost control of what they had created. That was the bittersweet truth. In the end, the Council had been right about one thing: the humans were dangerous beyond measure. But they had been wrong about why. It was not their ships, not their guns, not their industry. It was their ability to break logic itself, to carry paradox in their hearts and turn it into destiny. And that weapon could not be destroyed, because it lived in minds now far beyond Earth. It lived in the stars themselves. Perhaps one day, the galaxy would curse them. Perhaps one day, the paradox would collapse. But until then, humanity's planet ships would hang in the heavens like silent gods, not promising salvation, not threatening destruction, but simply asking the question no empire had ever dared to ask: what will you choose? And in that question lay the future of everything. If humanity's paradox shook your soul, if our silence made you question the galaxy itself, then don't let this story fade into the void. Like this video, share it across your worlds, and subscribe, because the next revelation will break the universe even further.